What if I told you that the worst moment of your life could become the one you'd never want to change? That a metal box suspended between floors could hold more meaning than 1,000 open roads? 5 strangers, 1 broken elevator, and a truth so powerful it would rewrite everything they thought they knew about connection. The fluorescent lights flickered once before settling into their sterile hum. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the elevator in the Riverside office complex was making its routine descent from the 14th floor. Inside, 5 people stood in that familiar choreography of avoidance, eyes on phones, bodies angled away from each other, each person locked in their own invisible bubble. They were strangers in the truest sense, not just unknown to each other, but unknowing. Separate universes that happened to share 18 square feet of moving metal. Marcus was closest to the panel, his finger still hovering near the lobby button. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, the kind of tired that comes from 70-hour work weeks and a marriage that had quietly dissolved into polite roommates. He checked his phone again. No messages. There were never messages anymore. Behind him, Elena gripped her leather portfolio against her chest like armor. She'd just bombed the biggest pitch of her career, 5 years of work, dismissed in 11 minutes. The executives had smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes, and now she was replaying every word, every slide, wondering where she'd failed, wondering if she'd always been meant to fail. In the corner, Sarah adjusted the strap of her hospital scrubs. Double shift. 3rd one this week. Her feet ached in that deep, bone-tired way that made her think of her mother, who'd worked herself into an early grave doing exactly this. She'd promised herself she'd be different. She'd promised a lot of things. The 2 others barely registered as individuals yet. Just shapes, shadows, fellow passengers on a journey that was supposed to last 45 seconds. Then the elevator shuddered. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a slight hesitation, like a missed heartbeat. Marcus glanced up from his phone. Elena's grip tightened on her portfolio. Sarah's exhausted eyes opened a fraction wider. The elevator continued its descent for another second, maybe 2, before the lights went dark and the entire box jerked to a violent stop. Someone gasped. Someone cursed. In the sudden blackness, the emergency lighting kicked in. Dim, red-tinged, and somehow worse than the dark had been. It painted everyone in shades of urgency and danger, like extras in a thriller no one wanted to be part of. "Is everyone okay?" Marcus heard his own voice, surprising himself with how steady it sounded. A chorus of shaken yeses came back. The elevator had stopped at an angle, tilted just enough to notice, suspended somewhere between the 9th and 8th floors, according to the frozen display panel. Marcus pressed the emergency call button. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. "Try your phones," Elena said, already pulling hers out. But the signal bars told the story everyone feared. No service. Not at this depth in the building's core. That's when the temperature started to change. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The air circulation had stopped with the elevator, and 5 bodies in a sealed metal box generated more heat than anyone wanted to think about. "They'll know we're stuck," the 4th passenger spoke for the first time. His name was David, though they didn't know that yet. Mid-50s, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the look of someone who'd seen enough of life to not panic easily. "The system alerts maintenance when an elevator stops between floors. Someone's already working on it." "How long?" Sarah asked, and there was something fragile in her voice that made everyone pay attention. "Could be 20 minutes. Could be a couple hours." David offered an apologetic smile. "Depends on what broke and how many maintenance techs are on duty." "A couple of hours." The words settled over them like a blanket, smothering, inescapable. Marcus loosened his tie. Elena set down her portfolio, finally accepting she wasn't going anywhere. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting, her head tilted back, eyes closed. The 5th passenger, a young man they'd later learn was named James, started pacing the 3 steps the space allowed, back and forth, his breathing getting shorter with each turn. "Hey, you all right?" Marcus asked. "I'm fine. I'm totally fine." James wasn't fine. His hands were shaking. I don't do well in small spaces. This is fine. It's all fine." Elena moved closer, her voice softer than anyone expected. "Look at me. James. That's your name, right? Look at me." She waited until his panicked eyes found hers. "We're going to get through this. All of us. Together. But I need you to breathe with me, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth." And in that moment, something shifted. The elevator was still broken. They were still trapped. The heat was still rising, and the emergency lights were still casting their ominous glow. But 5 strangers had just become something else. Not quite friends. Not yet. But not strangers anymore either. Marcus checked his phone again. 6:58 p.m. 11 minutes had passed. It felt like an hour. It felt like seconds. Time had become elastic in the semi-darkness, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. "So," David said, settling himself against the wall opposite Sarah. "What do we do now?" The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, because this wasn't really about what to do. It was about who they'd be while they waited, about whether 5 people could share space and breath and fear without fragmenting into their own private panics. Sarah opened her eyes. Elena stepped back from James, who'd managed to steady his breathing. Marcus pocketed his phone for the first time all day, and in the strange, suspended reality of that broken elevator, someone made a choice that would change everything. Someone decided to stop hiding. "We could talk," Sarah said quietly. "God knows we've got the time." It was such a small suggestion, such an ordinary thing, and yet, in that moment, in that place, it felt like the most radical proposition in the world. Nobody moved at first. Sarah's suggestion hung in the stale air like smoke, visible but untouchable. Talk. Such a simple word. But in a world where 5 people could share an elevator without exchanging a single glance, talking felt like crossing an ocean. Marcus was the first to break. Not because he wanted to, but because the silence had become heavier than any confession could be. He laughed, short, bitter, the kind of sound that escapes when you've run out of ways to hold things in. "You know what's funny? I haven't had a real conversation in 6 months. Not one. I talk all day. Meetings, calls, presentations. But I haven't actually said anything true since..." He trailed off, realizing he'd started a sentence he didn't know how to finish. Elena studied him with new eyes. The aggressive corporate armor she'd been wearing seemed to soften at the edges. "Since what?" "Since my wife stopped asking how my day was." The words came out flat, factual, like he was reading from a teleprompter. "She used to ask every night, and then one day she just didn't. And I realized she'd probably stopped caring about the answer weeks before she stopped asking the question." The confession created a pocket of vulnerability in the cramped space. James had stopped his anxious pacing. David had leaned forward, listening with the full weight of his attention. Sarah's eyes were open now, really open, seeing Marcus as something more than a stranger in a suit. "That's the thing about endings," David said softly. "They're never as loud as we expect them to be. No explosions, no dramatic music. Just a question that stops getting asked. A conversation that trails off and never picks back up." He paused, adjusting his glasses in that way people do when they're about to expose something tender. "My son hasn't called me in 8 months. Not once. And I keep telling myself he's busy. He's got his own life. It's normal for adult children to drift. But the truth is, I don't think he likes who I am. And I don't know if I blame him." Elena's breath caught audibly. "What did you do?" "I was the kind of father who thought providing was the same as being present. I worked. I paid for everything. College, apartment, his first car. but I missed his graduation because of a business trip. I forgot his girlfriend's name. Multiple girlfriends, multiple times. I was there without being there, you know. And now he's returning the favor. The elevator seemed smaller now, but in a different way. Not claustrophobic. Intimate. Like they'd all taken a step closer without moving their feet. The emergency lights painted shadows under everyone's eyes, made them look older and younger at the same time. Ancient and newborn. Weathered by life and startled by truth. James cleared his throat. His voice came out rough, unpracticed. I tried to kill myself 3 weeks ago. The statement landed like a grenade with the pin still in. Nobody knew what to do with it. How to hold it. Whether to look at him or look away. I didn't, obviously, James continued, and there was almost a smile in his voice. Almost. I stood on the edge of the Riverside Bridge for 45 minutes. Cars passing, people walking by, nobody seeing me. Nobody really seeing me. And I realized that's been my whole life. Present but invisible. I came down eventually. Went home. Went to work the next day. And nobody noticed I'd been gone in any way that mattered. Sarah stood up slowly, her exhaustion forgotten. She moved toward James, and in the dim light, her face was a study in recognition. I see you, she said simply. Right now. I see you. Something broke in James then. Not shattered. Opened. Like a door that had been locked so long everyone forgot it was supposed to swing. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he was crying in the way men cry when they've forgotten how. Silent and devastating and apologetically. Elena surprised everyone by moving to his other side. She didn't touch him, didn't say anything, just stood there, a quiet sentinel, letting him know he wasn't alone in his unraveling. Marcus watched this unfold and felt something crack in his chest. When was the last time someone had stood beside him like that? When was the last time he'd let them? His phone was still in his pocket, silent and ignored, and he realized he was grateful for the broken elevator. Grateful for the absence of escape. I'm terrified, Elena heard herself say. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words came anyway, pulled out by the strange gravity of this moment. Every day. All the time. Terrified that I'm not good enough, that I'm too much, that I'm simultaneously failing at everything and somehow faking success well enough to fool people temporarily. I bombed a pitch today that was supposed to change my life, and part of me was almost relieved because now I don't have to keep pretending I deserve it. That's imposter syndrome, David said gently. No. Elena shook her head. It's not. Imposter syndrome is when you think you're faking it. This is knowing you're faking it and being terrified of the day everyone else figures it out too. Every achievement feels like I've gotten away with something, like I've committed a crime and nobody's caught me yet. Sarah laughed, and it was so unexpected that everyone turned to look at her. God, we're all such beautiful disasters, aren't we? She wasn't being cruel. There was affection in it, recognition. I'm a nurse. I spend 12-hour shifts taking care of people, being compassionate, being present, being everything they need. And then I go home to an empty apartment, and I can't even take care of myself. I eat cereal for dinner. I haven't called my sister back in 3 months. I'm so tired I sometimes forget what day it is. And the worst part? I'm becoming my mother. I swore I wouldn't, and here I am, following her blueprint for slow-motion self-destruction. Why do you do it? Marcus asked. The job? Sarah considered. Because when I'm at the hospital, I matter. People need me. I make a difference in ways that are visible and immediate. Someone's in pain, I help them. Someone's scared, I comfort them. It's simple. The rest of life is so complicated, so ambiguous. But in that hospital, I know exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to do. It's the only place I don't feel lost. The temperature in the elevator had risen noticeably. They were all sweating now, jackets removed, sleeves rolled up. But nobody seemed to mind anymore. The discomfort had become part of the intimacy, a shared physical experience that matched the emotional excavation happening between them. David removed his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt, a delaying tactic while he gathered his thoughts. I spent 30 years building a company, 60 employees at the peak. I thought I was creating something meaningful, something that mattered. But I missed everything that actually mattered. My son's childhood, my wife's quiet struggles with depression, the way my obsession with success was really just fear of being ordinary. And now the company's sold, the marriage is over, my son won't speak to me, and I'm sitting in a broken elevator realizing that I traded everything real for things that were never real at all.
But you had success, James said, wiping his face. You built something. That counts for something, doesn't it?
Does it? David's question was genuine. I can't remember the last time I felt proud instead of just relieved that I hadn't failed yet. I can't remember the last time I felt connected to another human being in a way that didn't involve a transaction. Success? Maybe. But at what cost? And who did I become while I was chasing it? Marcus felt the words land in his own chest. He thought about his corner office, his title, his salary. He thought about coming home to a wife who'd stopped asking questions, and a life that felt like a long hallway with all the doors closed. We're all running, he said quietly. Different directions, different speeds, but we're all running from something, or toward something, or maybe just running because we've forgotten how to stand still. The elevator creaked. Just a small sound, metal settling, but it reminded them all of where they were. Suspended. Between floors, between moments, between versions of themselves. The emergency lights flickered once, and in that brief darkness, each of them felt the fragility of everything. Elena spoke into the silence that followed. What if we're not broken? What if this is just what being human looks like, and we've all been pretending otherwise? She looked around at these four strangers who somehow weren't strangers anymore. We spend our whole lives performing for each other, curating, filtering, showing the versions of ourselves we think people want to see. But maybe that's the actual tragedy. Maybe we're all dying of loneliness while surrounded by people because nobody's showing their real face. Sarah nodded slowly. I had a patient last week, 87 years old, dying of cancer. You know what he told me? He said his biggest regret wasn't the things he did wrong. It was all the times he held back who he really was because he was afraid of what people would think. He said he'd spent his whole life as a guest in his own existence, being polite, being appropriate, being anything except fully himself. And now? Marcus asked. Now he's dying, Sarah said simply. And he finally stopped pretending. And he said those last few weeks of brutal honesty were more alive than all the years before combined. The words settled over them like snow, beautiful and cold and transformative. James had stopped crying, but his face was still wet, still open. David had put his glasses back on, but his eyes behind them looked different, clearer somehow, or maybe just more willing to see. Marcus had moved to sit against the wall, his expensive suit crumpled and forgotten. Elena stood in the center of it all, her portfolio abandoned in the corner, her carefully constructed professional persona lying beside it like shed skin. 7:32 p.m. They'd been trapped for 45 minutes. It felt like years. It felt like seconds. Time had lost all meaning in this space between spaces, this accidental confessional, this involuntary intervention staged by a broken elevator, and fate's strange sense of humor. And then Sarah said something that changed everything. What if we don't go back? The question hung in the humid air like a spark near gasoline. What if we don't go back? Four faces turned towards Sarah, trying to decode whether she meant the elevator or something infinitely larger. I don't mean literally, she clarified, though her voice carried an edge that suggested maybe she did mean it, at least partially. I mean,
What if we don't go back to being who we were before this? Before we told the truth? What if stepping out of this elevator means we have to carry this version of ourselves back into the world? People don't change, or people don't let each other change, Elena countered. She'd moved back to the wall, sliding down until she was sitting with her knees pulled up, making herself smaller in the physical space while somehow taking up more emotional room. Maybe we're all trapped in stories other people have written about us. The successful executive, the perfect nurse, the disappointing son. And we keep performing those roles because changing the script feels impossible. David made a sound that might have been agreement, or grief. My son sees me as the father who was never there. And maybe I was that father. But what if I want to be someone different now? How do you rewrite a story that's been running for 30 years? How do you convince someone to give you a second chance when you don't even know if you deserve one? That if I show up, I'll disappoint her. That I'm too broken now. That she'll see what I almost did, and she'll look at me differently, and I'll lose her twice instead of just once. His voice cracked on the last word. It's easier to be alone than to risk being seen and rejected. The elevator creaked again, louder this time. A groan of metal that made everyone tense. For a moment, they all remembered where they were, suspended in a broken machine, dependent on cables and hope and the competence of maintenance workers they'd never met. The red emergency lights flickered, died for a full 3 seconds of absolute darkness, then returned. In that brief void, someone had gasped. Someone had reached out. When the light returned, Marcus realized his hand was gripping Elena's arm, and Sarah had grabbed James's shoulder. 5 people who'd been carefully not touching had become a web of instinctive connection in the space of a heartbeat. Nobody let go right away. "We could die in here," James said, and there was no panic in it now. Just fact. Just possibility. This cable could snap. The air could run out. They could not reach us in time. "We're not going to die," David said, but with less certainty than before. "That's different, though," Marcus argued, even though he wasn't sure what he was arguing for anymore. "Those are people looking back. We're people looking forward. We still have time to fail. Time to make it worse. Or time to make it better," Sarah shot back. "But only if we actually try." The temperature had become oppressive now. They were all soaked through with sweat, hair plastered to foreheads, clothes clinging. The air felt thick, used, like breathing soup. David had taken off his button-down shirt, leaving just an undershirt. Elena had twisted her hair up off her neck. They looked less like professionals now, and more like refugees from some disaster, which maybe they were. "Tell me something," Elena said, looking at each of them in turn. "If we get out of here, when we get out of here, what's the first true thing you're going to do? Not the first obligation or the first task. The first honest thing." The question created a different kind of silence. This one felt like potential, like standing at the edge of something high with the wind at your back. Each of them was doing the calculation, the terrifying math of courage versus consequence. "Then at least I'll know. At least we'll both stop living in this purgatory of polite fiction." Marcus wiped his face with his tie, not caring that it was silk and probably ruined. "Anything is better than this slow dissolve, where we're both too scared to say what we actually feel." Elena nodded slowly. "I'm going to call my mother. I'm going to tell her that I'm not the success story she thinks I am. That I'm struggling. That I'm drowning in imposter syndrome and anxiety, and this constant fear of exposure. And I'm going to stop performing for her approval." "Will she understand?" Sarah asked. "Probably not. But maybe that's okay.
Maybe I need to stop shaping myself to fit her expectations and just be myself, even if it disappoints her, especially if it disappoints her. Elena looked at her hands like she'd never seen them before. I'm so tired of auditioning for love. From her, from colleagues, from the world. I'm so tired of believing that if I just achieve enough, accomplish enough, prove enough, then maybe I'll finally deserve basic human acceptance. James was pulling harder at that thread on his jeans now, unraveling a small section of fabric. I'm going to call my sister back. I'm going to tell her what happened. What I almost did. And I'm going to ask her to help me find a therapist, because clearly I can't do this alone anymore. That's brave, David said. It's not brave, it's desperate. There's a difference. But James smiled when he said it. A real smile. Small, but genuine. Maybe desperation is just what it takes sometimes. Maybe we don't change until staying the same becomes unbearable. The elevator shuddered violently. This wasn't a small creak or a settling sound. This was the whole box shifting, tilting further, the screech of metal on metal that made everyone's blood ice over. Elena grabbed the railing. David pressed against the wall. Marcus pulled Sarah down from her pacing as the entire structure swung like a pendulum for 3 horrifying seconds before stabilizing at an even more pronounced angle. In the aftermath, 5 people sat on the floor breathing hard, hearts hammering, the reality of their situation suddenly very clear. They were suspended in a broken machine held by cables that were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. The rescue that seemed inevitable 10 minutes ago now felt uncertain. Time had become elastic, but so had safety. We need to get out of here, James said, and for the first time since his initial panic, real fear had returned to his voice. Another hour, maybe more. And the elevator was clearly unstable, held by compromised cables, tilting at an angle that suggested wrongness in every molecular vibration. The abstract possibility of danger had become concrete. The philosophical conversation about truth and change had collided with the physical reality of potential death. Sarah started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, but something darker, richer. The laugh of someone who just glimpsed the cosmic joke and decided it was actually funny. Of course, she said. Of course the universe waits until we all finally decide to change our lives before reminding us that we might not have lives to change. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect timing. But Marcus wasn't laughing. He was thinking about his wife, about all those conversations they didn't have, all those moments of silence that he'd let accumulate like debt. He was thinking about the possibility that he might die in this elevator without ever telling her that he still loved her, that he was sorry, that he wanted to try. The phone in his pocket felt like an anchor. No signal, but still. Evidence of all the calls he didn't make, all the texts he didn't send, all the reaching out he postponed until tomorrow. Elena had gone very quiet, her earlier fire dampened by fear. James had resumed his thread pulling with mechanical intensity. David sat with his eyes closed, and no one knew if he was praying or just trying to process the arithmetic of possibly dying here. Possibly never seeing his son again. Possibly having the last chapter of his story be this. Trapped in an elevator with strangers, all his successes and failures reducing down to this single point of metal and regret. The confession landed differently than the others had. This wasn't vulnerability. This was demolition. She'd let them believe something false, had crafted her story to fit the narrative of collective failure, and now she was revealing that she'd been performing even here, Even in this space they'd all agreed was for truth. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not anger, but recognition. So what do you actually want? Elena finally looked up, and her eyes were wet. I don't know. That's the terrifying part. I've been so focused on achieving, on proving, on succeeding, that I never stopped to ask if any of it made me happy. And now I'm 34 years old, and I have no idea who I am underneath the accomplishments. Then maybe that's the real work, David said softly. Not achieving more. Finding out who you are when you stop performing. That's scarier than any failure. The lurch had created something sharp and clarifying. Fear had a way of burning through pretense, and now 5 people sat in genuine silence, not the performed kind, not the polite avoidance that had characterized the first 6 minutes of their journey. This was the silence of people who'd run out of defenses and discovered they didn't need them anymore. Sarah was the one who broke it, her voice steady despite the trembling elevator beneath them. You know what's strange? I thought if I ever faced death, I'd be thinking about all the things I didn't do, the trips I didn't take, the risks I didn't accept, the life I didn't live. But that's not what I'm thinking about at all. What are you thinking about? James asked. This. Right now. These last 45 minutes with all of you. I'm thinking that I've had 1,000 conversations in my life that meant nothing, and one conversation with strangers that meant everything. She looked around at them, really looked, like she was trying to memorize their faces. I'm thinking that maybe we've been measuring life wrong. Maybe it's not about the length or the achievements or the milestones. Maybe it's just about the moments when we're actually present, actually real, actually connected. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes, which was absurd because he didn't cry, hadn't cried in years, had trained himself out of that particular vulnerability. But here in this tilted metal box with these people he'd never see again, the tears came anyway. I've been sleepwalking, he said, for years, going through motions, hitting marks, performing the role of someone who has his life together. And I just realized I can't even remember the last time I felt fully awake. Until tonight. Until this. That's the thing about crisis, David said, and there was a lifetime of experience in his voice. It strips away everything that doesn't matter and shows you what does. I built a company. 30 years of 16-hour days and brutal stress and relationships sacrificed on the altar of success. And if this elevator falls, if these cables snap, none of that will matter. The only thing I'll regret is that I waited until I was trapped in a broken elevator to actually connect with other human beings in a meaningful way. Elena had moved closer to the group, drawn by invisible threads of shared understanding. I think we're all trapped in elevators of our own making. Different kinds, maybe, but all of them boxes we've constructed that keep us separate, safe, alone. Our roles, our personas, our carefully curated versions of ourselves. And we spend our whole lives defending these boxes, fortifying them, making sure no one sees inside. But what if the boxes are the problem? What if freedom isn't about making our boxes nicer, but about stepping out of them entirely? The elevator was still tilted, still unstable. But somehow the physical danger had become less important than what was happening between them. James had stopped pulling at his thread. His hands were still now, resting on his knees, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't had before. 3 weeks ago, I stood on a bridge ready to step off because I thought I was invisible, that my absence wouldn't matter. But you all see me. Actually, see me. And I'm realizing that maybe the problem wasn't that I was invisible. Maybe the problem was that I was only showing people the surface. I was so afraid of being rejected for who I really am that I never gave anyone the chance to accept me. So what changed? Marcus asked. What made you step back from the edge? James smiled, and it was sad and beautiful and utterly honest. A dog. This random golden retriever came running up, no owner in sight. just this pure bundle of joy and energy. And he sat there next to me, looking up with those eyes like I was the most important person in the world, like my existence mattered simply because I existed. And I thought, if this dog can care about me without knowing anything about me, maybe I've been wrong about everything. Maybe connection isn't something we have to earn. Maybe it's just something we have to allow. Sarah reached out and took James's hand. Just that simple gesture, skin on skin, human touching human without apology or overthinking. And then Elena took Sarah's other hand, and David reached for Elena's, and Marcus completed the circle, grasping both James's hand and David's, until 5 strangers sat in a linked chain of flesh and honesty, and something that looked remarkably like hope. "We're going to get out of here," Sarah said. And for the first time, it didn't sound like wishful thinking. It sounded like fact, like faith, like a promise the universe was obligated to keep, because the alternative was simply unacceptable. The emergency lights flickered again but didn't die. The elevator groaned but didn't fall. Time stretched and compressed, elastic and strange, and no one knew if they'd been trapped for an hour or a lifetime, or just the space between heartbeats. But in that suspended moment, something profound was happening. 5 people were being unmade and remade, deconstructed and reassembled, dying to old versions of themselves and being born into something truer. "Can I tell you all something?" David's voice cracked slightly. "I'm going to call my son tonight, the second we get out of here. I don't care if it's midnight. I don't care if he doesn't answer. I'm going to leave him a message, and I'm going to say everything I should have said years ago. That I'm sorry. That I was wrong. That I want to know him. Actually know him. Not just the idea of him I carry around. That I'm scared he won't forgive me. But I'm more scared of not trying." "What if he doesn't want to hear it?" Elena asked gently. "Then that's his right. But at least I'll have said it. At least I'll have stopped being a coward." David's eyes were bright behind his glasses. "You can't force people to accept your apology or give you another chance. But you can stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. You can stop hiding behind silence and calling it respect for boundaries. Sometimes love requires you to be uncomfortable, to risk rejection, to say the true thing even when you're terrified of the response." Marcus thought about his wife, about the careful distance they'd maintained for months, about all the things left unsaid piling up like snow until they couldn't see each other through the drift. "I think we mistake peace for the absence of conflict," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. "My marriage is peaceful. We never fight. But that's because we never engage. We're 2 people living separate lives under the same roof, and we've convinced ourselves that not arguing means we're okay. But maybe real love, real connection, requires conflict sometimes. Requires saying the hard things and working through them instead of avoiding them." "My mother always said that smooth waters make poor sailors," Sarah added. "I used to think she was justifying her own misery, her own choice to work herself to death rather than face her problems. But maybe she meant something else. Maybe she meant that real growth, real depth comes from navigating the rough waters together, from choosing each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The conversation had shifted into something almost dreamlike, philosophical, the kind of talk that happens at 3 a.m. when defenses are down and truth slips through the cracks. They were still holding hands, this chain of strangers who weren't strangers anymore, and the touch felt like both an anchor and a permission slip. Elena squeezed Sarah's hand. "I think I'm going to turn down the promotion." The words fell into the space between them like stones into water, creating ripples. "I think I'm going to take some time to figure out who I actually am when I'm not achieving, when I'm not performing, when I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone, including myself." She looked around at their faces. "That terrifies me more than anything I've ever done, because I know how to succeed. I'm good at it, but I have no idea how to just be." "None of us do," Marcus said. That's the secret everyone's keeping. We're all just pretending we know what we're doing, following scripts we don't remember memorizing, playing roles we never auditioned for. Then maybe the bravest thing we can do is stop pretending, James said. Stop performing. Stop curating. Just show up as we actually are and see what happens. The speaker crackled suddenly, making them all jump. The maintenance voice came through clearer this time, stronger. Riverside 4, we've stabilized the cable system. We're going to start bringing you down slowly. Should have you out in the next 15 minutes. Everyone okay in there? We're okay, David called back, and the collective exhale was audible. We're more than okay. But as relief flooded the elevator, so did something else. A kind of grief. Because they all knew what was coming next. The doors would open. The real world would rush back in with its demands and obligations and all the reasons why change was impractical. They'd step out of this suspended moment and back into their separate lives, and the probability of them remaining connected, remaining changed, felt impossibly fragile. We should exchange numbers, Sarah said urgently. Before we lose this, before we go back to being who we were. They pulled out their phones. Still no signal, but the contact apps worked, passing devices around the circle, inputting numbers with the focused intensity of students cramming for a final exam. Because this felt like a test, like the universe asking if they were serious about transformation, or if this was just another story they'd tell themselves before sliding back into comfortable numbness. Promise me something, Elena said as they returned phones to pockets. Promise me that a month from now, we meet up. All 5 of us. And we tell the truth about whether we actually changed anything, or if we just had a nice bonding experience that we forgot about by Wednesday. I promise, Marcus said. I promise, echoed Sarah, then David, then James. The elevator began to move, and this time it was controlled, intentional, a slow descent that felt both like rescue and loss. They were still holding hands, and no one wanted to be the first to let go. 30 seconds. 20. 10. The numbers on the display panel beginning to work again, counting down from 9 to 8 to 7 to 6. Thank you, James said, and his voice broke on the words. For seeing me. For all of this. Thank you for being brave enough to be real, Sarah replied. For showing us it was possible. The elevator settled at the lobby with a gentle bump. They could hear voices outside, see shadows moving beyond the closed doors. The maintenance team, probably building security, maybe even paramedics, because that's what happened when elevators broke down for this long. The machinery engaged, gears turning, and the doors began to slide open. But before they did, before the outside world could rush in and claim them back, 5 people stood together in their chain of hands and looked at each other with the kind of recognition that transcends words. They'd been strangers less than 2 hours ago. Now they were something else. Witnesses to each other's unraveling and reconstruction. Holders of truths too tender to speak anywhere except in crisis. The doors opened to bright lights and concerned faces and the abrupt reality of the world beyond their suspended box. But they didn't immediately step out. They stood there for one more breath, one more heartbeat, memorizing this moment and each other, and the feeling of being fully present, fully seen, fully alive. Marcus would go home and wake his wife and have the conversation that should have happened months ago. It would be hard and messy, and there would be tears from both of them. But they would start speaking truth instead of performing peace. Sarah would submit her resignation the next morning and feel terrified and free in equal measure. David would call his son and leave a message that was entirely honest. And 3 days later, his son would call back, and they would begin the slow work of rebuilding. James would start therapy, and on particularly dark days, he would remember 5 strangers in an elevator and the way they'd held his braking and didn't let him fall. Elena would turn down the promotion and spend 6 months figuring out what she actually wanted instead of what she thought she should want. And it would be uncomfortable and worthwhile in ways she couldn't have predicted. They would meet up a month later at a coffee shop, all 5 of them, And they would tell the truth about their struggles and victories, and the ways they'd backslid and pushed forward. And they would keep meeting, once a month, then once every few months, then whenever someone needed to remember what it felt like to be seen. They would become a strange kind of family, bound not by blood or history, but by one night when a broken elevator forced them to break open their carefully constructed lives. But none of them knew that yet as they stepped out into the lobby, blinking in the bright lights, being checked over by paramedics with concerned expressions. They just knew that something had shifted, that they'd gone into that elevator as 5 separate universes and emerged as something interconnected. That the worst moment had somehow become the one they wouldn't trade for anything. Because here was the truth they'd discovered in that tilted metal box. We spend our lives building walls to protect ourselves from pain, from rejection, from the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. But those same walls keep out everything we actually need: connection, understanding, the devastating beauty of being seen and accepted anyway. We think we're being safe, but we're really just being alone. And maybe the point of being human isn't to avoid breaking. Maybe it's to find the courage to break open, again and again, trusting that there will be someone there to see us in our cracked and honest state, and say, yes, this, exactly this. You are enough just as you are. The elevator behind them stood empty now, doors closing on the space where 5 lives had been transformed. The maintenance team would fix it, make it safe, and by tomorrow, it would be carrying people up and down again, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that couldn't be measured or repaired or explained to anyone who hadn't been there. 5 strangers had been stuck in a broken elevator and had left with full hearts, carrying proof that the most profound journeys don't take you anywhere except deeper into truth. That sometimes you have to be trapped to finally feel free. That the question isn't how to avoid breaking, but who you want to be holding your hand when you do. And in a world of curated perfection and performative living, maybe the most revolutionary act is simply this: showing up as yourself, messy and scared and honest, and trusting that's exactly enough.